One of the things we struggle with in Kodshim is how different it is. The method of approaching it, the method of understanding, the method of reasoning, the use of logic as opposed to the use of axioms, limudim from the Torah, learning things directly out of the Torah. Kodshim has a flavor and a method to it that is unique in Shas. It's different from the other Masechtas that we've learned. On the other hand, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that the Torah is a single integrated system. In our shir on Lo Yavdil, the Zevachim Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph, we'll see that in a very profound way. The Zohar says on our in our parsha this week, talking about the fact that the whole universe is made up of trillions and trillions of particles, and yet they all form one system, and one has to look at the universe systematically or systemically. So the human body is made up of billions of little parts, and you've got to look at the whole body as an integrated system. So says the Surah, Chalab Kegavna Doraisa, and the Torah is the same. The Kula Shaifin V'Firkin V'Kayomin Ilin Ala Ilin. The Torah also is made up of lots of different parts and pieces, and they all work one with the other. V'Chad Mitat Knan Kulu. It avid chad gufa. And when one puts it all together correctly, it becomes one integrated system. And so we have to be able to look at the Torah in its different parts. Just as with the human body, if you're looking at a heart problem, you need a cardiologist. But if the cardiologist looks only at the heart and is not looking at the whole body, he's missing a whole lot of the picture. So with Torah also, if you're learning Kodshim, you've got to be a specialist in Kodshim while you're learning Kodshim. You've got to use the method of Kodshim. But at the same time, you've got to look at the Torah as one system and not isolate Kodshim from the rest of the Torah. And our sugya is a great and just amazing, kind of almost absurd, almost crazy example of that. If I read to you two psukim from the Torah, the one in Parshas Vayikra, the psukim we're busy with, a korban chatos of a sin offering of a bird. And the Torah says, V'shisa oto b'chanafav, and you've got to break it at its wings, lo yavdil, but don't separate it into two pieces. And you bring it as a korban on the mizbeach. It's an oilo. Here we're talking about a korban olah. That taught you that pasuk. And then I said, let's learn another pasuk. If a person opens or digs a pit in public domain and doesn't cover it up, and somebody's ox or donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit has to pay. If I learned those two psukim with you and I said to you, what's the connection? No connection. I could hardly imagine two less connected pieces of the Chumash. And that's why, as I learned the sugya, it was one of these cases where I just read the Gemara the first time and said, not just the first time, but the 50th time as well, and just said, really? Are you serious? Just look at what goes on. It says the Gemara, I heard that the halacha is that when you bring a sin offering of a bird, you may break it into two. Here it's talking about separating the head from the rest of the body. You may break it into two. Umay lo yavdil, but we just learned in the Chumash, lo yavdil, you must not separate the bird into two. Ain't sorich lavdil. That doesn't mean you may not, it means you don't have to. Lo yavdil, you don't have to separate it as you do in a korban oilo, but not in a chatas. Omale Rav Acha bred Rava le Rav Ashi. Says Rav Acha, the son of Rava, to Rav Ashi, really? Elo me'atu gabi bo dichtiv v'lo yechasenu? In the posuk in Mishpatim it says, and if he doesn't cover the pit, hachinami de'en tzorich l'chasos, does that also mean you don't have to cover a pit? If you dig a pit in the Rishus HaRabim, you don't have to cover it. Really? Let's just stop there. Just the question of the Gemara, you don't have to go further. Really? I'm saying that the lo yavdil in Vayikra means you don't have to split the bird. In some cases, you do have to split the bird. In this case, you don't have to split the bird. And I'm saying that doesn't mean you may not split the bird. It means you don't have to split the bird. And you're saying, does that mean also when it says v'lo yechasenu that you don't have to cover the pit that you've dug in the Rishus HaRabim? It just doesn't begin to make sense. So at least I'm relieved by the fact that the Keren Oira asks the question as well. And it's always very comforting when something like that happens, because if nobody asks the question, you think that you're losing it completely, that you don't understand anything of what's going on, which might be true in any case, but not necessarily in this particular case. Why is the Gemara putting these two psukim together? What's going on here? And he asks the question in a more lomdish way, and he says, clearly in Vayikra, it's talking about a tzivui, it's a commandment, lo yavdil, like lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo yavdil. That's how the Torah articulates a tzivui. It's a mitzvah, it's a commandment. V'yesh lefaresh v'lo yavdil b'shnei panim, and you could explain that two different ways. Or sheba ba'azara shelo yavdil, or it means you may not break the bird in two. Or sheba lo maden tzarich lahavdil, or it means to say you don't have to separate it. And both of them are a tzivui, both of them are an instruction. Aval hatam gabibo lo ne'amar beloshen tzivui elo derech mikre. But in Mishpatim, the Torah is just setting up the scenario. It's just describing the case. A man dug a pit, and he didn't cover it, and somebody else's ox or donkey fell into the pit. It's just describing a scenario. Why? What is the comparison? And the Keren Orah goes on to answer it. We won't deal with the Keren Orah's answer at the moment. It's not an easy one. And what seemed to me as I was learning this, that the question is so profound that if you have the question, you're not learning it correctly. This isn't a question that you answer. This is a question, it's like Reb Chaim Shmulevitz used to say about Rabbi Akiva Eiger's questions. Don't bother trying to answer them. If Rabbi Akiva Eiger leaves a question unanswered, it means if you have the question as he does, find another way to learn the Gemara, because there's no answer to this question. And this question here, when we look at this Gemara, and I said to you, look at it and say, really? Is that what we're doing here? It's so profound and so obvious and so extreme that one has to understand the Gemara in a different way. And I struggled to find how else one could navigate this Gemara to make some kind of sense of it. Then I found Rabbi David Soloveitchik asks the Keren Orah's question, but with different wording. And from his wording, it gave me an insight to learn it, not the way he learns it. And he says his father asked the same kasha, and not quite the way the Keren Orah works it, but he gives us a key. So Rabbi David Soloveitchik says, Tzorich ma hadimyon. What is the comparison? So in that way, it's similar to the Keren Orah. De le'inyan chatat ha'of, pshita dechol divrei haTorah hem dinim. And here's the key. He says, because when it comes to chatat ha'of, when it comes to the sin offering of the bird, clearly every word of the Torah in Vayikra there is a law. It's a din. V'lachen yitakechen de kavanat ha'Torah le'asor havdalah belav, v'yitachen de kavanat ha'Torah leva'ed de'en tzarich lahavdil. It could be that the din, the law the Torah is giving us is, thou shalt not, you may not split the bird. Or the law could be, you can if you want to, but you don't have to. Both of those are laws. Those are both laws. But in the case of Mishpatim, the Torah is just telling a story. The Torah is giving us a case study. So how can you do this? What is the comparison between Mishpatim and Vayikra? One could think of other cases maybe where you could ask the question. Tosfos goes into, are there other cases where you can ask the question? But this is so absurdly different. Why would you throw the two together? And he says, V'kachik shomar Aranzal, my father asked this question, the Briskerov, V'ayin Keren Orah, and look at the Keren Orah, and he said, and you said, this still needs some checking out. It still doesn't add up. So using that idea of Pshita dechol divrei haTorah hem dinim, I thought, let's examine the sugya from that perspective, that the whole Torah is dinim. That means every word in the Torah is an imperative. It's an instruction. It's a way to see the world. It's a way to live in the world. It's a way to be. It's not just setting up scenarios. That's not what the Torah does. And it's not providing context. The Torah doesn't provide context. For that we need Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's why you've got Rashi on the Chumash. Because you use Torah Sheba'al Peh to give the context. The psukim don't give context. And that's why it's so you can learn anything from the Pasuk if you don't have Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al Peh gives context. The Chumash, the Torah itself, gives no context. Every word is directive. Every word is telling us something. In that case, we can understand the Gemara very beautifully. The Gemara wants to start off saying, this which it says in Vayikra, V'lo Yavdil, that you don't have to, that you don't separate, V'lo Yavdil v'iktir Torah Kohen, that Lo Yavdil doesn't mean you may not, it doesn't mean you may not, it means you don't have to, you're not obligated to split it, you can leave it whole. Then Gemara comes along and says the following, are you suggesting that the Torah is telling us you don't have to? I mean, why would the Torah do that? And the Rishonim try and deal with that. Tosfos and others deal with that a little bit. But why would the Torah do it? Would the Torah tell us, it's not raining today, you don't have to go out with an umbrella? Would the Torah tell us that? Do we need the Torah to tell us what you don't have to do? The Torah is there to tell us what you have to do or what you may not do. The Torah doesn't tell us what you don't have to do. If you don't have to do it, leave it alone. Leave it up to each person's decision. So what are you telling me? That Lo Yavdil is you don't have to. In that case, I will read the Pasuk in Mishpatim the same way. It's just setting up the scenario. It's just telling you a situation. The person dug a pit and he didn't cover it, and a cow fell into it, which is the way we normally learn it. And in that case, lo yechasenu doesn't mean you have to cover it. In other words, the Torah is saying a person dug a pit and he didn't cover it, but he should have covered it. No, the Torah is just telling you the case. He dug a pit, he doesn't have to cover it. You've dug a pit, you're responsible, now you'll have to pay for any damages, but you don't have to cover it. Surely that's not the case. So the Gemara is objecting to the possibility that the Torah ever gives us something which isn't an imperative. And the lo yechasenu then has to be learned. In this case in Mishpatim about not covering the pit, that's also an imperative. What is the imperative is? The imperative is if you did dig a pit, you have to cover the pit. That's also an imperative. And we see that in the Rambam, on the next page of the sheet, where the Rambam says, it's based on a Mechilta and a Yerushalmi, whether a person dug a pit, or it was dug some other way, or an animal dug it, ho'il v'hu chayav lemal oto o lechasoto v'lo asa, harei ze chayav b'nezakav. You have to pay damages because you should have covered and you didn't. Where does the Rambam get it from that you should have covered? Because the Rambam holds no word in the Torah is contextual. No word in the Torah is just setting up a scenario or telling a story. So if the Torah says v'lo yechasenu and he didn't cover it, the Torah is telling us, and that's why you're chayav. Because you in any situation, we learn in the beginning of Bava Kama, that if you have a mazik, if you've got something that's potentially harmful, chayav b'shmirato, you have to take care of it, you have to protect it. You created a pit, you have to cover it up. And if you didn't cover it up, your lack of covering it up is what makes you obligated to pay. So you see that the verse in Shemot is, in Parashas Mishpatim, is not just setting up a scenario. This is not just telling a story. This is giving us the very source of the chiyuv, the very source of the obligation. The reason you have to cover a pit is not to avoid litigation. The reason you have to cover a pit is because you've created a mazik, and it's morally unacceptable, apart from being legally unacceptable, to have created or to own a mazik, something which can cause damage, without protecting it. You're not allowed to do that. If you've got a high roof, you've got to put a marquee around it. You've got to take steps to protect people from potential danger that you own or have created. That's a principle in the Torah. And so yechasenu is the obligation. You have to cover the pit, not to avoid litigation. Even if you're in some situation where there are no people and there are no animals, you're the only person for hundreds of miles, you still have to cover the pit. Because shmirato alav, you can't keep a mazik, you can't own something which is potentially harmful. That's the important part. So v'lo yechasenu, like every other word in the Torah, is an imperative. And if lo yechasenu is an imperative, then lo yavdil is also an imperative. And how can you suggest that lo yavdil means you don't have to? Clearly lo yavdil must mean you may not split it, you may not break it up. And that's just an amazing example of how to understand the Gemara. If we understand the Gemara starting with that principle that kol divrei haTorah hem dinim, every word of the Torah is a din, is a halacha. Every word in the Torah is an imperative. Then we can navigate through the sugya in such a way that it makes perfect sense to bring these two things together, because lo yechasenu is a great example of where you might think the Torah is just giving you a case study, that the Torah is just giving you context, just creating a scenario. And even there we see it's not so. It's actually giving you an imperative. If it's giving you an imperative there, then every time the Torah says, lo, you shouldn't do something, it means don't do it. So then how does the Gemara resolve it? So Rabbi Shimon says, Shamati b'chatat ha'of shemavdilin umay lo yavdil ein tzarich lahavdil. What does that mean? As Tosfos says, I might think that because I've got to take blood out of the bird and put the blood on the wall of the Mizbeach, the most efficient way to do that is to open up the bird completely, or to cut the bird's neck completely so that all the blood comes out of the bird and I can put the blood on the Mizbeach. Comes the Torah to tell us, no, you don't do that. As long as you've got blood to put on the Mizbeach, you don't have to go so far. So, but why not? Why would the Torah tell us that? There's a little chizkuni on the posuk that I noticed where the chizkuni says, lo yavdil, don't break the bird, because then you're bringing to Hashem too small a piece. This is not an ox that even after you've broken it, there's some reasonably sized pieces. This is a little bird. And now you're going to break the bird into two. It's even smaller. You don't bring a korban of such a small piece. And I was wondering to myself, the chizkuni is going against the Gemara. The chizkuni then is saying, lo yavdil means you may not. It's wrong to do it. But we can use the chizkuni to understand the answer of the Gemara here. I might think that since I have to put blood on the Mizbeach, the best way to do it is to break the bird in two and get all the blood out. There I'll be doing the mitzvah as well as I possibly can. The Torah says I've got to put blood on the Mizbeach, fine, but I'm going to put all the blood on the Mizbeach. No, says the Torah, lo yavdil, because if you do that, yes, you're excelling in the mitzvah of the blood, but you're deficient in the mitzvah of hidur. You're bringing a little piece of a bird instead of bringing a whole bird. And very often when we try and do one mitzvah in a very muhudadika way, we want to be very excessive and extreme and particular in a particular mitzvah. The message is here, you've got to watch it, because sometimes you're being extreme in one area and it's at the expense of another area. And the whole Torah is one integrated system. Everything has to be balanced. Everything has to be integrated. And one has to make sure that one's meticulousness in one area of halakha doesn't damage another area of halakha. That one has to bring together all the bein adam lechaverus and the bein adam lemakams, the interpersonal mitzvahs and the God mitzvahs, all the different parts of Shulchan Aruch. One has to bring it all together. One has to bring the musar, the behavioral ethics, one has to bring together with the halacha of the Torah. It all has to be one harmonious, beautiful system of living, and not to do one thing at the expense of the other. Lo yavdil, yes, you might think you should break the bird in two to do the mitzvah hadam better. Says the Torah, no, but if you're doing the mitzvah adam better, you're doing the actual korban in a deficient way. Therefore, lo yavdil, there's no reason to do that at all.